Welcome to Tales from SYL Ranch Live, the vlogcast that reminds you that you're always welcome to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone. Looks like we got a couple of viewers. Hi there out there to whomever you may be. Hear me a live QUARAN-STREAM episode 1, the Phantom Menace, because it sort of goes along with what's ailing us all right now. And I've got a little bit that I maybe have a structured plan to talk about. Otherwise, I'm just going to rattle off the top of my head and talk about whatever my viewers want to talk about. But while I wait for some more people to show up, I'll go ahead and explain my show for those who may be unfamiliar with it. Tales from SYL Ranch is a science fiction, fantasy, superhero, and other sort of genre-related review show. Sometimes I review serious films and TV, sometimes I review schlock, and sometimes I review modern films with a broad appeal, such as Star Wars movies, Marvel movies, the Orville, Doctor Who, lately Batwoman, although that's gone on indefinite hiatus. It is, of course, the modern-day Plan 9 from outer space. What I don't watch or even view anymore is Star Trek, because Star Trek is no longer Star Trek. I have talked about this in my video of the same name, and you can find a link to that in my description box. For classic films or TV, I generally stick to a period from about 1900 to 1980, and that's because the period after that's pretty well documented. However, 1900 to 1980 contains a lot of science fiction and a lot of science fiction fandom that isn't documented, so part of the reason I do the show is to document it. Most of my reviews are pre-recorded, but for special occasions, such as this one, I will come on for a live stream. When I'm live like this, I will take any and all questions, comments, and nasty remarks. I will respond to as many of my viewers as possible. You can tell me if I missed something, if I'm completely full of crap, or if I happen to be just an amazingly hoopy fruit. I will always, in my reviews, go into far more depth than other reviewers. I don't just say if I liked a film or not, walking through its plot and saying what I liked or didn't like. I go into the acting, the direction, the cinematography, and all of the mechanics of making a film. And I can do this because, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I was once an actor, so I speak with a little authority. Not as much as a modern working actor, and I never want to give that impression, but with some authority. As there's an old saying, those who can do, and those who can't teach. I suppose that doing my reviews is a little bit like teaching. One thing I do not do outrage reviews. There are a lot of reviewers who are simply actors portraying outrage because they found out after The Last Jedi that outrage sells. They hate everything as a knee-jerk reflex because their viewers want to see them hate things. And this creates a weird feedback loop between reviewers and fans where it kind of goes back and forth, hate, 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 until nobody likes anything, even if it's any good. So I don't do that. If I like something, I'll tell you why in detail. If I dislike it, I'll say why in detail. But I don't do outrage. Unlike other reviewers, I am the adult in this particular room. So that is my show in a nutshell. Live streams like this, you'll see me taking drinks pretty frequently because I get dehydrated quickly. So I do have a couple of things that I can talk about, but I'm going to wait till I have some other viewers on to talk about it that I have sort of structured. I usually try to come into these structured because I don't get a ton of views. So it's good to come into something structured like this so that I have something a little to talk about so that I'm not just wailing off the top of my head. Nobody's understanding what I'm talking about anything. I can certainly say that it's interesting to me that Batwoman has gone on indefinite hiatus. They are apparently going to blame this on the COVID virus. However, if they didn't have episodes in the can, at least for the next 2 or 3, it's kind of a little weird that you'd be blaming us on COVID and start doing reruns. I don't know if that's necessarily meaningful. I wouldn't mind if it was meaningful. You know, I've gotten to the point where my regular viewers know I don't review Batwoman anymore. It's just too stupid. There is no point in my putting through the kind of effort that it takes to review something with Batwoman. I tried doing a straight-up reaction video of it. That kind of sucked. And then I went to live things like I'm doing here tonight. I would come on live and just react to it and, you know, go back and forth with my viewers. That's about the right speed. If I just sit there and review it, what I end up doing is just pointing out all of the stupid, because there's so much stupid in Batwoman. So if Batwoman doesn't come back, I ain't going to be exactly the most upset dude in the universe. It's interesting in as much as Batwoman, it doesn't for me, but for a lot of other YouTubers, seems to get a lot of views. I haven't had that kind of luck, but that's why I keep doing it, because I'm shamelessly trying to get some views. But what I've generally found if I'm doing a review of it is that I find some stupid that other reviewers missed, or they find some stupid that I missed. You know, it'd be kind of interesting for me to go through and it's like take reviewers here, there, and everywhere, and then put it all together. This is the stupid. This week in stupid on Batwoman. So, otherwise, I'm doing live Bat streams where I will just watch the video, watch it as it shows. I guess on the New York side of the feed, the East Coast feed, on the CW. But not tonight, because there ain't no Batwoman until probably May, apparently. I guess it's April, 26th? Let me look at the date here. Yeah, I think 2 weeks is when they're supposed to have it back, but, you know, who the hell knows? We really have no idea how it's going to turn out. We don't have a clue. And as I say, if it never came back, that would be okay with me, personally. Now, I haven't done any reviews, per se, in a couple of weeks. I'm a bit behind on my actual doing reviews. I've stopped doing promos because I'm never quite sure now when or where I'm going to get to certain reviews. I will get back to them very shortly. Tomorrow, the next day, something like that, you'll start seeing a classic out of me, and then something that's probably a fan film, because when we're in the middle of hiatus for just about everything, a lot of stuff is on hiatus. A lot of things have been pushed back. I'm noticing, too, on YouTube, I'm starting to see a lot more live streams because people have less and less to talk about. And everybody seems to be cooped up in their home. Now, with me, it's a little different. I might not look it necessarily because on screen I'm projecting something, but in real life I'm kind of an introvert. So, like, being home, not much of a change for me. Not that it matters much. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska, essentially the geographic center of the United States. And we don't have, let's see, right now in the entire state, which is, I don't know how many people, over about 2.5 million, we have 814 positive cases out of 10,991 tested, and only 7 deaths. In my county, which is the second largest second largest city in Lincoln, in Nebraska rather. My county has 54 cases, no deaths. The major area of infection is Douglas County, which includes Omaha, Nebraska, which is about 1 million people. And they have 212 cases. I'm not sure how many deaths. It doesn't specify. Again, we've only had 17 deaths here in Nebraska. So we're not under any crazy restrictions or anything. They have closed down a lot of businesses. But, you know, in terms of being, the streets are still full. I don't know what the stupid purchasing of toilet paper and hand sanitizers looking. I have a nephew that works in retail, and he was telling me that for a while, you know, every morning they'd get new shipments in, and every morning it would sell out in 5 minutes. I don't know how long if that's gone on still or not. It would be kind of stupid if it was. So we are not New York City, thank God. You know, those of you on the East Coast, you know, in New York City and around there, hey, you know, here's my thought. Here's my honest-to-God thought. See, this thing was going to eventually happen, where you had some kind of illness that went through a huge, densely populated area of the United States, like New York City. My honest-to-God suggestion is, when this is all over, leave. Spread out. You know, you're trapped in a little island there and some other large areas around it. You're all stuffed in there like sardines. If you want to avoid this in the future, get out. Get to where there's more geographic area. Not suggesting necessarily that you come to Nebraska, but I mean, hell, you know, even the suburban Chicago doesn't have the kind of, you know, densely packed population that New York City has. I've seen both New York City. I went there. I've gone there several times. I've been to the West Coast several times on business, both times, with the exception of one time I went there as a recreational thing to New York City. So I've been there a few times throughout my life, and I lived for about 10 years in Chicago, and I can tell you that, you know, even Chicago doesn't have the same kind of population density that New York City does. New York City has got to have, I don't know, I haven't looked it up, it's got to have the most densely populated area in the United States. So if you want to avoid this happening in the future, my suggestion is to get out in other places. You know, go to Chicago. It's not as packed. Especially if you live in the suburbs, it's just, you know, houses. It's not densely packed like New York City is. And if you want to come out my way, I mean, hell, I'm doing a live stream from here at 1080p. There's nothing here that we have that you don't, or vice versa. We have all of the amenities. There's nothing unusual about us. Anything you may have heard about us negative really isn't true. We have everything you do, just a little less of it, not quite as densely packed. That's my suggestion. Otherwise, if you're sitting in your house and you're starting to go stir crazy, I am the perfect guy to watch tonight. Like I say, I've got a couple of things that are kind of structured that I'm going to talk about. One of them kind of may be interesting. I had somebody ask me on a Facebook group. Suppose CBS came to me and said, pitch a Star Trek series. Go. So I have my pitch. CBS, if you're watching, fire Alex Kurtzman and Michael Chabon. They are hack frauds who don't know how to write Star Trek. I do. Call me. I will pitch this later on. You can call me, and you'll have a good Star Trek series, one that fans and non-fans alike will enjoy. I also have a little bit to say, just politically, about things that are going on with essentially voluntary. What I want to say, voluntary. I don't know, caging we're doing now of ourselves. It's become quite insane in terms of what we're doing in placing ourselves basically in our own house arrest. Maybe it isn't necessary. Maybe it's problematic for our economy. I'm certainly of the opinion it's problematic for the economy. Around here, I just look at all the businesses that have closed. And, this over in my city, 54 cases in a city that has a metro area of about 340,000. 54 cases represents about 0.015% of the population-ish. And for this, we're putting everyone out of business. We just don't have that many cases. Oddly enough, the second largest place that has cases is Hall County, which has our third largest city, and I'm not sure what the population of Grand Island. That's where Hall is. Grand Island is in Hall County. I don't know what the population of Grand Island is anymore. The last time I knew was many, many years ago, and it was only in the 50, 60,000 range. It may be up to 100,000 now. Interesting to me that they've got that. I wonder why that is. It's not where it parts off to. That's not where the interstate parts off. I'm looking at a map down here in front of me. It's not where the I-80 parts off to become to go down to Colorado. So I'm unclear why they've got those kind of infections in Grand Island. They don't have much of an infection vector. That's, by the way, how I tend to look at this. I look at infection vectors. I don't just look at infections nationwide and assume that every place is exactly the same. I look at infection vectors. So, for example, here in Nebraska, we don't have any international airports here. We are a landlocked state. The nearest border, if we get to the Pacific Ocean, is about 2,000 miles. To get to the Atlantic is about 2,000 miles. To get from here to Mexico, I'm not sure what it is, 1,000 or so. To get to Canada, it's 2 states north, 2 entire states north. So we don't have that much of a vector. We don't have international traffic coming in and out of our state. We don't have really visitors from the east or west coast because they hate our guts and they never show up here anyway. But we just don't have the visitors, that come in from places that have large infections. So our infection vector is very small. But you get out to, New York City, multiple international airports in the immediate area. They have just enormous numbers of ports, ports for, ocean ports. They have all of these, and nobody who comes into the United States is tested for anything at all. So that means that you can have international trade and travel going on, and God knows what it'll do. But beyond that, you have extremely dense population. We have a city of 340,000 in the metro, but you could easily fit the island of Manhattan inside of it. So they've got a lot more population density than we do, considerably more. So with that, people packed in together like that, if you get one person who's got it, it's going to spread, it's going to spread, it's going to spread. I mean, if you got a, brownstone that's got, 10 apartments in it, well, they're all sharing the same ventilation. It's not like the ventilation just goes away. It goes from one apartment and goes completely away somewhere. No, the ventilation is being shared in there. So they have a huge infection vector. Anytime you have something that's pandemic like this, you should expect to see it in New York City because they have a gigantic, fantastic population density. I haven't spent much time in either of them. I've spent enough time in Manhattan to go, okay, here's a place with very dense population. But I haven't spent that much time in Los Angeles. I've stayed there a few times. Also stayed in San Francisco a few times. And neither of them strike me as having the kind of density that New York City has. You can go to places that are kind of dense. When I went to Chinatown in San Francisco, that was fairly dense in terms of population, but nothing like, what you just sort of constantly see on the island of Manhattan. It's just constantly dense. So as I say, I look at things like that. You look at neighboring Colorado, which borders Nebraska on part of it. That has one single international airport and a lot more international stuff going on. They have the Cheyenne Mountain complex and the Air Force bases that go along with that. So they've got people coming in and out. They have much. I don't know. I haven't checked lately to see what their numbers are, but they've got double or so Nebraska. But again, that makes sense. They have a wider infection vector because they've got more people there than in terms of the international travel. And their population density is nowhere near ours. I've been to Denver on a number of occasions. One of my kids lives in a suburb of Denver. Higher population density, but no higher than here in Nebraska. Just a lot more people. There's more suburbs, and so it's a bit denser as opposed to Lincoln or Omaha, which has very few suburbs. So again, I just look at the infection vector. And if y'all in New York City want to avoid this in the future, my suggestion is that you move. The biggest problem here is the population density. And I think New Yorkers would be well served to seriously think about moving. You could go to Chicago. That doesn't have the same kind of population density. You could come live in Nebraska. We are happy to have you, provided you leave your leftist politics at home. That's not something that's too terribly popular with us. I may have to move my green screen just slightly. Yeah, we don't have the same politics as you, and we would appreciate it if you leave them there, because we don't think that that's very useful for us. I had to explain this to a friend of mine once, and it's something that particularly urbanites and even people that live in cities like mine of 340,000 don't understand when it comes to making laws for large parts of the United States. People have very, very different ways of living. Now, I'm lucky in as much as from about age 5 to 15. 2 weeks to a month every year in the summertime I would spend on my grandparents' cattle ranch, which is in extremely rural South Dakota. In fact, during the Dust Bowl of the Great Depression, the Badlands of South Dakota that you see behind me, that I've landed my TARDIS on, were where my grandmother, on the tops of those, where you can see sort of the top of it, where the TARDIS is, my grandmother used to herd cattle because that was the only place during the Dust Bowl where any actual grass would grow. It's extremely rural. And so what you find out when you get down to something like that is you have to be very, very generalist. A rancher or a farmer, they have to be able to both be just somebody who raises cattle, somebody who looks after the cattle, a veterinarian for the cattle. You have to be prepared to euthanize cattle if you need to. I was party to that on 2 separate occasions. You have to really be a generalist. I mean, hell, one of my uncles did not wait to be born in a hospital. My grandfather delivered him. And you don't have the option, of going to town. If something happens, you're going to be the one to fix it. I always like to point out that, when my grandfather was buried, there is a family cemetery out there in the middle of nowhere that I have a plot for. When I die, that's where I'm ending up. And when we buried him, it was me and my uncles and another cousin who lowered that casket into the ground. We had because there's nobody out there. There's nobody out there to dig the graves. We had a second cousin with a backhoe, and he came out and dug the grave. We physically lowered it into the ground, and he put the dirt on top of it. If you don't do it, it don't get done. It's just that simple. You have to do everything. Whether you like it or not, whether you're sick or not, you got to do everything. So you get into cities, and you get into specialization. Now, I was an IT wonk for 40 years. That's what I know. You want to talk to me about computer stuff, servers, internet, all of that, I've done it. I know it back and forth. But if you put me in front of my car, well, about the only thing I can do is check things like, okay, are the battery cables connected? Does the battery have a charge? And I can change my oil, but only on my current vehicle, because for the 25 years preceding that, cars had gotten so much lower to the ground, it was damn near impossible to get under there to change your oil. But that's the sort of specialization you get. You know one thing and only one thing. And so you need the help of other people around you in this big connected ecosystem in order to survive. So when you get into making laws that make sense for, metro areas where you have this web of interconnectedness of, specialists, those kind of laws don't work in a place where you have to be a generalist. You can't make a law for a city that works well for a country, somewhere out in the country. You just can't do it. So when you see our states going red, well, that's because typically, Democrats want to pass laws that will work well in cities, and they will be to the detriment of people who work and live in the country. And so that's why you tend to see our states going red. And so that's why if you're coming from New York City, and you want to, reduce your infection vector for the next time that something like this happens, and it will eventually, I don't know when, but it will. If you're going to move and you're going to come here, that's fine. We're happy to have you. Just leave the politics behind, because what worked maybe in your city, in your big city, does not necessarily work in our smaller cities. Might work in Omaha, that's a population of 1 million, but, other smaller cities, Lincoln, we wouldn't want those politics here. It won't work well for us. It doesn't work the same. This is why you should also have your government really at a local level, state or local level at best. When you start getting the federal government to make decisions for you, you're kind of screwed. There are at least, let me see if I can find the picture where I have it. I think I usually keep it up. No, I don't have it up. I've got a picture. I didn't build the card for it before I came on, but there's a picture that I've got that shows professional wrestling territories back in the territory era. If you can find this, do. I'll look it up and put a link to it in the description box when I'm done with this, so people watching on demand can watch it and see it. But there is a map out there floating around that is of professional wrestling territories during the territory era. That was before WWE took over everything and everybody had individual territories like that. That territorial map is an accurate representation of the different subcultures within the United States. And I'm not talking about things like, race and all that stuff. I'm talking about subcultures that are generally geographic, that are broken down out sort of by how the region was settled first, and also how they tend to make their money. So, you get coal miners in Virginia, right? That is its own subculture compared to where I'm at, which, it's a city. It's got its own little subculture, too. But in general, this area, was settled by a certain kind of white people. And, it's not that we hate black people. It's just that this area was settled by white people. So you don't see as many black people as you do in the city. I mean, hell, you go to Omaha, even parts of Lincoln here, you'll see plenty of black people, plenty of different races. But the region as a whole was settled by white people. And so you get that subculture combined with this sort of must be a generalist, do everything or else it don't get done sort of mentality. That's a subculture. It's different from if you're mining for coal. This is a totally different subculture. So I'll get that map and I'll put a link to it. If I get a second here, maybe I'll build a card with it in it because I know I've got the picture. But it's an accurate representation, and there are at least a dozen, if not more, individual subcultures within the United States. You can pass a law at the federal level that will probably help several of them, but at the same time it will hurt several others. You really can't pass a law at the federal level that's going to be good for everybody, because we have all these different subcultures, and everybody has a different way of working, a different way of making a living, different way of thinking. And there's nothing wrong with people thinking different ways. You do laws at the federal level are never going to work like that. Best laws, in my opinion, in my state of Nebraska, the vast majority of which in terms of land is agriculture. Our actual population is centered in 2 cities. But the vast majority of the land is agriculture. I would say the cities can make their own individual laws for their citizens and then let everybody else make their laws. That's how I would do it. That would be how I would avoid, this problem of passing laws for people that doesn't work. Even here, laws that work in the city. I give you a perfect example, right? We're required to put out our these plastic things, right? This is a plastic bottle with some Sprite in it, right? We're required by city ordinance to wash these out before we put them out into the recycling bin. Okay, that's kind of insane right on the face of it. From my perspective, I know where these things are going. They're just going to get crushed. I can't imagine, because they're going to go out and they're going to go into a truck in the elements, and then they're going to go out someplace and be smashed. I can't imagine that having a little bit of residue of soda pop inside of it is going to be a problem. But that's the legislation. That's what we're supposed to do. I think I'm probably the only person around that does it. Frankly, I don't do it. I occasionally make trips to Iowa, which is a bordering state. Iowa takes 5 cents a pop on these bottles, so I like to take them there and get 5-cent deposit back from them. But in any case, I don't know necessarily that anybody, but I am doing that, and that's because of, certain restrictions placed on me by where I'm living. But if you tried to do that, out in some ranch in extremely rural Nebraska, that's 100 miles from nowhere, here's how those guys get rid of their garbage. They dig a ravine, or they find a ravine, they fill it full of garbage until it's overflowing, and then they cover it up with dirt. They make their own landfills. Doing this thing where they separate out all the plastic and the glass and whatever newspaper or something, that isn't even feasible. There would be no way to do it. There's literally no way they can do that. I mean, where would they take it? You can't expect them to drive 60 miles to town. That's ridiculous. They make their own garbage dumps. That's the way it works. So passing that law for them would be stupid. That's just an example of how you can't pass laws for one place that'll work in the next. That you have to make it as local as possible. So, it does look like I've got about 3 viewers with 2 likes, so thank you very much for showing up. Feel free to chime in at any time, because I'm a relatively small creator and don't always get a ton of views and likes. I will really take any and all questions, comments, and nasty remarks. You can say anything you want to, and I will pop it back and respond to it. So I guess I'll talk about something. I have a couple of structured things I can talk about that aren't just ranting on about various things like I was doing then. I was in a Facebook group fairly recently, and it was an old one. I'm so old that not only did I build much of the modern internet that you use, you're welcome, but in addition to that, I predate the internet with when I get to online Star Trek fandom. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, there was once a pre-internet international Star Trek forum. It was facilitated by a network called FidoNet, which operated very, very differently from the internet. But one of the groups on there was the Trek Echo. Now, that's what they called it. It was a forum. Technically, they called them Echoes back then. So it was this Trek forum. We were very lucky in as much as we had lurkers there who were from the Star Trek production staff. Patrick Stewart lurked there. And Sir Patrick once saw me write. Because the first 2 seasons of that, like now, I used to review stuff. That's what I've done since forever. I used to review stuff just for kicks. And so I reviewed almost every episode for the first 7 or so years of Next Gen. And I got to, the first 2 seasons, kind of rocky. If you watch them now, they're kind of rocky, a little hokey in places. Gene Roddenberry's hand, or in this case, Maurice Hurley's hand, who thought he was, really enforcing Gene Roddenberry's rules. You can kind of see it all there. It's a little heavy-handed in places. Kind of rocky, especially the second season. Very rocky because it was in the middle of a writer's strike, so it made things miserable. But we got into the third season, and that's where they hit their stride. And I remember writing the exact words. Yeah, Measure of a Man is a good one from the second season, absolutely. It's kind of a standout, I think. If you look at a lot of the ones from the second season, kind of a standout. But Measure of a Man is very good, Larry Lane. Hi, how you doing tonight? Anyhow, I started writing in the second season. I don't remember when, but I wrote these words. This is the finest season of Star Trek ever produced. So at the time I was working as an international courier between Chicago and Toronto. I would fly up there every night with a bunch of stuff, drop it off where it needed to go, wait till the next day, and walk the stuff all through customs and stuff because it wasn't coming in from the U.S. Wait till the next day, pick up some stuff in Toronto, and then fly back to Chicago and deliver it. So I'd get in late at night, usually, midnight-ish or even later. And so I would, when I was doing my deliveries late at night like that into early morning hours, I would have the CBC, Canadian Broadcast Company, radio turned on. So one night I'm driving along on the big expressway, the freeway they've got there, and they have Sir Patrick on, and he's being interviewed. And they say Sir Patrick said, and I quote, "There are some people who are saying that this is the finest season of Star Trek ever produced." My jaw dropped, because I did not at that time know that Patrick Stewart was one of the lurkers. But my jaw absolutely dropped, and I damn near drove my car off into the into the ditch. I was just astonished to hear what I had written coming out of Sir Patrick Stewart's mouth. Wow, that was shocking to me. So we had these people lurking back then. Anyhow, to get back to this. The FidoNet Trek Echo went pretty much the way of FidoNet. However, we all kind of kept in touch. We have a mailing list from when mailing lists were big. That's still active. We have a Facebook group now that is fairly active. It is the FidoNet Trek Echo group, if you want to look that up on Facebook. We allow about anybody in. But the hardcore people in there are people who have been with this since the 1990s. About late 1980s, early 1990s. As a group of people that I consider friends, even when I strenuously disagree with them, which I often do. I often very strenuously disagree with them about things like Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Discovery, but they are friends that I have known now for 30 or so years. That group's still going. Hey, Star Siege player, how you doing? And happy Easter to you too. I didn't mention that for those of you who are Christians and celebrating this holiday. Happy Easter to you, even if you're stuck in your home or wherever. But I hope you're able to celebrate the holiday as you hopefully can do and feel good doing so. Anyhow, so there's this FidoNet Trek Echo group on Facebook now, and I have been going back and forth to some length about my dislike for Star Trek Picard lately. And so one of the guys in there, I've known for 30 years, has said, okay, he started a new thread that said, okay, CBS comes to you to pitch a new Star Trek series. Go. Well, guess what, guys? I have been thinking about this for about 30 years now. Way back when, at least 20, I guess, way back when Babylon 5 was a thing, I had been thinking about this idea for a series since then. At least 20 years, 25, something like that. I've had this noodling around in my head. So for the first time, I wrote it down. I posted it in there, but I'm going to go ahead and talk to it right here. This is what I would do. CBS, you have come to me for what you said, Bill, we get it. Our Star Trek sucks. What will you do to make it all better? Here's what I'm going to do, CBS, for you. This is my pitch, guys. Just listen. So we have a new Star Trek series. We're going to call it, and I know this is sort of harkening back to a Gene Roddenberry property, but it's not really. We're going to call it Star Trek Andromeda. Now, the format will be, in advance, we're walking into this with a plan for the entire series. It will be 5 seasons with 24 episodes each, none of this 10 or 12 crap. Each season will have an arc. The series itself will have an arc. But the episodes within any given season will still be 4-act, sort of one-and-done stories that then will contribute to the larger overarching arc. This sort of thing, the model we're using here is kind of the modern Doctor Who model prior to Chris Chibnall. Each of those episodes is its own individual plot, 4-act dramatic structure, which ages well. The dramatic structure they're using right now will not age well. You can look in my thing. I've got a video called Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery will not age well, and it's not due to the content. It's due to the dramatic structure. So our episodes are still going to be a whole complete story of 4 acts as a one and done, except that in some way each of these episodes is going to contribute to the overall arc. Hey, Dalton, glad you make the stream. So I missed the last couple. It's no problem. Glad to have you here. The last ones I've been doing have been for bat streams, live bat streams for Batwoman, and she's not on, so I figured, what the hell, I'll come on. And it's the middle of everybody starting to go stir crazy, except for people like me, because I'm an introvert. So, hey, jackpot, as far as I'm concerned. Star Trek players, so people could pick up without having seen all the previous shows. Yeah, in general. I mean, there are arcs in the individual seasons and an overall arc for the 5 years that I'm planning here. But any individual episode, yes, you could. It's like Doctor Who used to be. You could walk in and sit down and see a story and see a complete story within an episode that then would have threads that would tie into the arc. But if you sit down as a viewer, casual viewer, and you just sit and watch it, you go, okay, I know this story. I understand what's happening in this story. I don't have to sit and wait for 10 episodes, before it comes out. That's not going to age well. I said it in my video, Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery are not going to age well because of that dramatic structure. The 4-act dramatic structure of a single story has been with us since the ancient Greeks or before. When you deviate from it, it doesn't last. I think by deviating from it in the way they've done, making it a serial. I mean, who is watching the old, Buck Rogers serials? Because that's kind of what they've done, just minus the cliffhangers in some places. Who watches those? And it's partly because it's, you got to watch all these episodes in order, and who wants to sit and do that? Yeah, but having seen the others makes a richer experience. Exactly, starts each player, precisely, yeah. So that is the general format. So back into our backstory for this, because there's a backstory. In the year 3116, way off in the future, somewhere on the Federation frontier, a semi-stable wormhole to the Andromeda galaxy was discovered. Now, it only opens every 5 years. So it is now 50 years after it was discovered, and Federation scientists are pretty, they think, okay, for 50 years it's opened every 5 years to the exact same place in the Andromeda galaxy, the sensor probes. So they're pretty good about, okay, this is going to be stable for us. So the story begins in 3166. And that is not accidental. That is, Star Trek started in 1966, so it's 3166. And we are on the eve of the departure of an exploration and colonization fleet that's going to go through the wormhole when it opens. This fleet consists of the exploration ship USS Enterprise, NCC 1701, no letters because they gave that up a long time ago. It is an exploratory ship, so she has weapons that are mostly intended for defensive purposes. She's certainly armed effectively against enemies you might encounter in deep space, like we've seen over and over and over in Star Trek. There was also a Starfleet Corps of Engineers ship, the USS Montgomery Scott. There is a destroyer, an outright military ship, the Acheron, and unlike the Enterprise, she is a military vessel and armed to the teeth. There are 2 one-man scout ships, the USS Lewis and the USS Clark. You should get that reference. If you don't, then you're American, learn your history. And we're going to have something called the Heavy Transport USS Hercules. Now, it is similar in function to the old Ptolemy class that was seen in Franz Joseph's Starfleet Technical Manual, but that's just sort of a rough description of it. It's not going to look like this It's just going to have the same idea, concept behind it. You've got a basic starship that can attach to cargo pods, and you can trail multiple cargo pods behind it, like this one here. We will have 14 cargo pods. We'll name them at some point. Doesn't matter at this pitch stage. Yes, these would be moving as an exploratory and colonization fleet. The Starships player. Yes, exploring and colonizing. Because we'll have these 14 pods that this sucker's going to drag behind it. Now, 6 of them will be cargo pods, and 6 of them will be cargo pods, and they'll carry 1,500 colonists each. 6 of them will then carry the necessary cargo to found one of these colonies. There's going to be 6 colleagues. They're going to have 2 pods each, one for people, one for whatever they need to start the colony. They're going to have 1 pod that contains 700 Starfleet personnel necessary to create and man a starbase. And then the last pod will carry the cargo and material required to create a starbase, whether it's on a planet that they happen to find near the open end of the other end of the wormhole, or just starting up a space station. So the mission on this fleet is to travel to the other end of the wormhole, immediately establish a starbase on that side of it, and then the Enterprise will search for 6 nearby uninhabited Class M planets. And this means, in this case, the Enterprise will be also aided by the 2 scout ships I talked about. Now, these scout ships are similar in conception to how the TNG era runabouts worked, although they're very, very different in execution, and you'll see why in a moment. The Enterprise is not enormous in size. It turns out that, centuries ago when they had the Enterprise J, which was basically a giant city that was moving around, it turned out to be not so great for exploratory purposes. So this ship, the Enterprise, is actually smaller than the Voyager. We don't know what it looks like yet. We'd have to get with, good art directors and whatnot and come up with a design. This is the overview. So, when the Enterprise finds these Class M planets, they will be colonized. Now, I have to get into the technology a bit because things have changed quite a lot since the 24th century. It is, after all, the 32nd century. There have been a lot of improvements technologically. Warp drive is no longer used. Instead, they use transwarp conduits like the Borg. You basically specify an exit point, and you are there in only a few minutes, no matter how far away in the galaxy it may be. Theoretically, you could go intergalactic, but the power required to do this is beyond the 32nd century technology. Power is still generated via antimatter reactors. However, they are roughly the size of those seen in the Doctor Who episode, The Saranga Conundrum. If you've ever seen that, the things were about, 4 feet tall. That was their antimatter reacting chamber. No reason it can't be like that now. It's 32nd century. The Enterprise, for example, has 6 of these things, reactors, and they all fit in a room that is 50 foot by 50 foot and only 1 deck high. Antimatter reactors can be replaced by just unbolting them and removing them by hand, and the Enterprise and other starships carry multiple replacements. Having a problem with your antimatter and intermix shaft is no longer an issue. There are still deuterium and anti-deuterium tanks to keep this reaction going, but they, along with the reactors, are actually no longer on the inside of the ship because, frankly, putting anti-deuterium anywhere inside your ship is a freaking stupid idea. What if somebody accidentally punctures the thing? Stray phaser burst. Boom. So those are up the reactors, everything along with that are now up in the engines where they should be. 90% of the functions of Starfleet vessels, including navigations, engineering, repair, weapons, defense, and even command of the ship, are now handled by an AI on the ship. And like all Starfleet ships, the Enterprise is considered alive. And the crew doesn't give the Enterprise orders. And in fact, the crew on the Enterprise is only made up of 50 people. 25 of them are scientists, and the other 25 are Starfleet Marines, because exploring requires several things. One is that, the ship itself is handling just about everything. So you need specific scientists who are, for some specific things, who can beam down to planets and do things that the ship can't do in orbit. And then you need some people to protect them. That's why we have the Starfleet Marines there. This kind of a live starship has been used for several centuries. It is considered totally foolproof, and we will only see it fail for one very specific reason later on. The crew come from a variety of races. Many we've seen before in Star Trek, many we haven't. It'll just be a hodgepodge. Haven't worked out any of the characters on something like this. So Starseeds Player says, yeah, so the AI alive and sentient like Rami from Andromeda. Yeah, except we take it one step further. We just say, the ship's alive, period. It is a life form all of its own, and it handles all shipboard functions like a life form would. If something needs to be repaired, nanobots go out and repair things, or larger robots go out and repair things. But it's sort of similar to the immune system and repair system of a human body. We don't have people inside there telling it where to go. A part of our brain is just saying we got to fix this, and things are happening automatically. And we don't bother with saying there's a captain of the ship anymore. The ship is the ship. If it wants to go somewhere, it will go somewhere. If it says, oh, we're picking up, signs of a class M planet, 10 light years that direction, I'm going to set a course for it. It just does it. we cut out the middleman. These ships are foolproof, and we will see it fail one time, but under very specific circumstances. One of the biggest and most difficult for writers to write around things that we're going to see here is something that is called a ring. And this is because they look just like a ring that you might wear on your finger. They're damn near the equivalent of a Green Lantern ring, except, of course, they're not green. Every 24th century Federation citizen is given one at birth. And they have been used for centuries and are considered foolproof. If they're ever seen to fail, it will result in at least making the wearer virtually lobotomized. Rings can only be removed surgically and never are, because it would result in essentially lobotomy. And we will never see one removed in this series. They are equipped with their own AI that literally integrates with the wearer's mind. The wearer has instant access to the sum total of all Federation knowledge. Essentially, the wearer will become a super genius at birth. See, the reason I'm doing this is because I was in IT for 40 years. And I can tell you that what they're showing for IT right now on Star Trek ain't going to be the way it is in the 30th century. What you're seeing me talk about here is, or the 24th century, or the 23rd. It may look cool now, but it ain't going to look cool in 20 years, and it ain't going to be anything like what we actually have done. So I'm going from what I think could possibly happen in the future with our IT. So these rings, they generate roughly the same amount of power as a small spaceship. We don't know how, we don't know why, we don't care. It will never be explored because these things are considered foolproof, and they are. We will not see them fail. Rings have the power to manipulate energy down to very fine tolerances. For example, no one wears clothes anymore. They wear an energy suit that is indistinguishable from clothing. And they can change their clothing at will because it's just being generated by this ring. The energy suit can both be an impenetrable force field and an environment suit. One can walk as comfortably on Jupiter's surface as in the vacuum of space. The ring then controls gravity around the wearer. Not surprisingly, there's no more artificial gravity on starships. You can generate it, but why bother? The wearer of the ring simply chooses what direction is up, and the ring creates a personal gravity field for that direction. And of course, this means that someone who's wearing one of these rings can, in fact, fly. The ring contains fantastically accurate sensors. The wearer can essentially see anything in the electromagnetic spectrum and beyond out to vast distances. The wearer can see through almost any substance if they want to. And the ring also has fantastic communication systems. The wearer can communicate via anything from voice in atmosphere to the EM spectrum to subspace. Range is interplanetary, with interstellar being possible in some very limited circumstances, and that would also obviously make it a universal translator. No known weapon can penetrate a ring. It's quite possible if you fired a photon torpedo at it, the energy might be absorbed for power for the ring. It can be used as an offensive weapon. It can fire projectiles ranging anything from lead to plasma. It can fire beams ranging from lasers to phasers and beyond. And about the only thing it can't do are things like photon torpedoes and beyond. They can be used for damn near anything. Given a few hours and some nearby materials, you could conceivably construct the Hoover Dam with it. Again, it's almost like a Green Lantern ring. Now imagine that you have a spaceship, a starship, with 500,000 of these things or so integrated into the starship itself. It is no wonder that the starship is going to run and command itself. So that's just the Technobabble backstory. A writer coming to the series, if they were looking at the series Bible, would see that, and they would say, okay, wow, so we've got impenetrable, invulnerable heroes. How do we write stories about that? Going to be a challenge. So the story itself, Season 1, it is 3161, and our fleet of ships traverses the wormhole in Season 1, Episode 1. Once there, we'll spend a couple of episodes on stories relating to the construction of a new starbase, Andromeda, which is going to be a space station because there's no planet out there. As an aside, by the way, my hometown science fiction and Star Trek fan club here in Lincoln, Nebraska is Starbase Andromeda. I joined this group in the mid-1970s, and it still meets today. So the name of this starbase, as Starbase Andromeda, is not accidental. We will establish that the USS Montgomery Scott, remember that was the Starfleet Corps of Engineers ship, and its crew of engineers are going to build the station. And all of the cargo pods, the colony pods, the USS Hercules, they will all remain at the station for the next year, both to help build it and to get started on the tasks necessary to kind of get a leg up so you're ready for go out and, land and colonize. Again, the USS Hercules, the big, cargo vessel that operates in, conception, at least something like this guy. That's going to be staying at the station. The USS Acheron, which you remember I said was an offensive military ship, a destroyer, it will be on patrol in the area of where the space station is being built, kind of for obvious reasons. So for the rest of Season 1, we will follow the USS Enterprise as she looks for 6 uninhabited Class M worlds suitable for colonization. This season will be very, very similar to the original series and The Next Generation. Over the course of this season, the Enterprise will explore strange new worlds and seek out new life and new civilizations. There will be episodes where she finds worlds that are inhabited, some not, some that have civilizations that have interstellar travel, some not. We can make a few, Star Trekian kind of social commentaries in there if we want to. But it is, again, very, very similar. It is a boldly go where no one has gone before sort of season. However, the Enterprise will also stumble on to the Kelvins. Now, if you're familiar with it, these are a totally non-humanoid race that we saw once in Star Trek, the original series, in the episode By Any Other Name. This is almost 900 years ago, Star Trek time. In that episode, in Star Trek, the original series, the 23rd Century Enterprise had encountered a few Kelvin scouts sent to the Milky Way to assess if it were a candidate for conquest by the Kelvin Empire. And we will assume in 900 years, because other people would follow those guys, that subsequent Kelvin expeditions to the Milky Way managed to ultimately settle peacefully in Federation. But the ones we see in this series, the Kelvins here, are the remnants of the Kelvin Empire that remained behind. And unlike those Kelvins who integrated into the Federation, these are still an aggressive species. They're no longer conquerors, although they fancy themselves as such. They are more desperate to maintain what they already have because it's constantly slipping away from them. They are descending into barbarity. Now, the Enterprise will first encounter them on the periphery of their space in an episode entitled The Kelvin Outpost. And that is no accident either. The Kelvin Outpost was the name of my fan club, Starbase Andromeda's fanzine. Kelvin Outpost is going to appear repeatedly in the show. The Kelvins are utterly hostile to the Federation, colonizing anything anywhere close to their space. And while the Enterprise initially starts exploring planets and run into the Kelvins and say, okay, we're going to go off in the other direction. So they're going to try to explore planets that are in the opposite direction. Subsequent episodes will begin showing the Enterprise bumping into them on occasion. And this will set up an interesting ethical dilemma. Here the Enterprise, this whole mission from the Federation is to colonize the Andromeda Galaxy, but it is filled now with people who really don't want them there. It is the edge of Kelvin space. There's plenty of room for Federation colonies. The Federation could obviously, want to coexist. But these Kelvins, they know only empirical conquest. They cannot possibly understand peaceful coexistence. So these guys in many ways are worse than the Klingons were. Klingons were intractable, but these guys are totally unmovable. You cannot deal with them at all. However, this penchant for conquest long ago made Kelvin space all but uninhabitable for anyone or anything. We see it mentioned in that original series Star Trek episode in which they appeared. Because they were conquerors, the Kelvins had no real compunction about destroying entire solar systems with rather disastrous long-term effects, and most of the former Kelvin Empire is now highly irradiated. So, while Federation technology has advanced incredibly in 1,000 years, Kelvins have only stagnated and regressed. They are essentially on parity with the Federation in terms of weaponry, not a lot of other stuff. But in a fair fight, there's really no, predicting who would turn out to be the victor in something like that. So we end with Season 1 with the Enterprise having found 6 planets and making a recurring enemy for the remainder of the series. And then we have Season 2, and the show's focus is going to change really dramatically. Season 2 will have a series of 2 to 4-part 1-hour episodes. They will either sort of be TV movies or kind of mini-series. If you get a TV movie that's 2 hours, 2 parts of a TV movie, 4 that's spread out over 4 days, that's what they used to call in the 70s and 80s a mini-series. And these will be, Season 2 then will show the Enterprise escorting the Hercules and 2 of these cargo/colony pods to one of these planets, and then leaving. And then we'll spend 2 to 4 episodes on that particular colony. We'll spend no time with the ship. They're there to drop off the stuff. So long, goodbye. So then Season 2 is going to focus on all of the colonization efforts with different casts for totally different episodes. And by doing these as 2-part, what amounts to a movie, or 4-part, what amounts to a mini-series, we can get into, getting these characters, our audience comfortable and empathizing with these characters, and so they'll be emotionally invested, hopefully, as we go along. Again, the characters themselves I've never thought out. The locales I've never thought out. I'm trying to get out the big picture here. But in colonization, it's a risky business. I mean, you can never see everything from orbit, or even with a few landing parties, even ones that have these near magical devices like the rings. There will be all kinds of issues as colonies set themselves up to be self-sufficient, particularly as this requires a lot of agriculture, something I'm, at least can talk about. And that may not sound as easy as it is when you're on an alien planet. And there may also be non-sapient life forms or animals, which could be a major problem. The thing about this is you could do very, very different tones when you're getting into these episodes that are centered around a colony. You could get into a radically different tone. I mean, suppose you find, the alien from Aliens on one of these colonies. You could get a very different tone. And they'll each have very different tones. Or could. So, in the last few episodes of Season 2, colonies will be outright attacked by the Kelvins, and they'll have to fend them off by themselves. They'll send out a distress call to Starbase Andromeda, but nobody's going to get there in time to help you. And one of these colonies that we have spent a lot of time trying to get the user, not the user, but the viewer, invested in emotionally, hey, we like these people. One of these colonies is going to be destroyed outright, massacred, down to the last man, woman, and child. So Season 3, we will then return to the Enterprise, and this season she'll be making rounds to the various colonies. Some of the 2-part episodes in which the Enterprise will get, then they'll have 2 parts or so that gives them major help. And we'll see the characters that we saw in Season 1 interacting with characters and locales from Season 2. The Enterprise will also continue to bump into the Kelvins, and they've been fortifying now the Kelvin outpost. Of particular concern, of course, is going to be that colony that was completely destroyed. Season 3 will end on a cliffhanger, and it is now outright war with the Kelvin Empire. Season 4 then is pretty straightforward. It's war. The Enterprise, Acheron, Hercules, and Montgomery Scott are refitted as warships outright and are the combatants against the Kelvins. Might seem like a small fleet, but when you consider they've got, technology that can create these rings and sapient starships that can pretty much do everything themselves, it's not so bad. We end up at the end of the season with a stalemate. Starbase Andromeda will have taken damage. The Hercules has been destroyed. The Acheron is nearly out of commission, and the Enterprise is left brain damaged because its AI is left in what amounts to a vegetative state as a result of the battle. The only good news is that the colonies were able to be defended, although not without some casualties among the casts that we spent time with in Season 2. Season 5, our last season, will be back aboard the Enterprise. The Corps of Engineers will be spend much of the season sort of rehabilitating the AI, while human crews then take over for functions that would ordinarily have been done by the AI. So where the AI, will move over crew from, the Starfleet Corps of Engineers ship to the Enterprise, because those, 25 scientists on there, they don't know how to run all this stuff. It's always been done for the computer by the computer. So we will spend the 5th season with the Enterprise limping from colony to colony, checking on their situations and providing assistance wherever is necessary and, in this case, possible, given the condition of the Enterprise. And near the end of the season, by the end, maybe we'll have a few more skirmishes, but by then the Kelvins are just about through fighting. It's the same as the Federation is. They don't want to fight that much anymore. They see that it's just a stalemate where they end up just hammering each other until they get both of them have nothing left. So near the end of that season, the 5th season, the Kelvins will and the Federation will come to an uneasy peace, with the Kelvins sort of realizing, okay, maybe coexistence is possible, although to be honest, probably we're going to get the distinct impression that they're motivated more by acquiring technology from the Federation than they am with peace, particularly. So the final episode will have the USS Enterprise, the Hercules and Acheron. I'm sorry, Hercules was destroyed. The Montgomery Scott and the Acheron going back through the wormhole to the Milky Way galaxy. And on the other side, we will see 3 other ships and 14 more cargo/colony ships that are ready to go through to relieve them at Starbase Andromeda. And fade out the end. That's my pitch, CBS. You just got it. Note that while I have spent a season at war, the overall tone of this is not nihilistic. You will notice that I have made an amazing jump in terms of technology, and that's because, having spent 40 years in IT, I know that everything that we see right now is wrong. I think that what I described is where we're more or less heading. I don't know, could be in my lifetime. I've guessed wrong repeatedly about where I thought things were going to be, and it went farther. So hell, this all could be within my lifetime. Maybe not the manipulation of energy and all that, but turning your phone into something that fits on your finger. Yeah, that's very likely. Quantum computing is making supercomputers the size of your thumbnail. And there's some work right now going into communicating with computers with your mind. And there's work going on right now that would have you wearing a pair of contact lenses where the display that you're seeing on your computer would be in a heads-up display only in your field of view. No one else would be able to see it. And you would interact with this by moving your hands around. You might go, okay, I need a new window for YouTube. I'll pull that over and open it up so I can see it here. I'll put it over here because I don't want to watch it directly. Need me a keyboard. I'll just pull out a keyboard. It needs to be about this big, and I'll put it down on a flat surface and type. But you'll be the only person seeing it. I envision at some point before my life is over that offices will look like people doing this. Just people wandering around doing this from time to time. Wouldn't be surprised at all if that part of it came true. The sort of Green Lantern ring nature of it, no, not really, but you get 1,000 years out, yeah, we're probably going to be way beyond that in all reality. So my intention here with this is to give us some really, really farther forward-thinking IT than we've seen in the past by someone who has a lot of experience with that. This is, of course, only the broad format of the show, very broad strokes regarding the arcs. It would, of course, obviously be necessary to develop at least multiple casts, one on the Enterprise, one for each colony that we're going to spend a lot of time with, and those two we have to get the viewer emotionally invested in so that when things like that colony gets destroyed is a big deal. And we'll need, of course, recurring characters for other starships and, of course, Starbase Andromeda itself. And you have to take care with these, again, so the viewers are just as invested in the Enterprise crew, but also in the colonies. The destruction at the end of Season 2, entire destruction of the colony, down to the last man, woman, and child, should be both shocking for the viewer, saddening for the viewer, and it will have subverted their expectations in a good way because they wouldn't have thought that we'd gone there. You know, there'd be characters in there that people would care about, and we will have killed them off. So really, the show is basically continuing with another series, but it focuses on, you know, going through and colonizing, exploring new worlds, colonizing planets in this Andromeda galaxy. So the intent is for the series to have an arc that is about colonization and making peace with a dying civilization desperate to hang on to what they have. And scene. You know, that's my pitch, CBS. Come and talk to me, and I will get writers who know how to write, as opposed to writers who only know how to write horror. Star Trek is always optimistic. When it's not, you have screwed up. And in my opinion, that's where Discovery and Picard screw up, is they miss the optimism that is inherent in Star Trek. So for me, if I was doing this, you know, just the fact that you have this amazing piece of technology that fits on your finger is a huge, huge piece of optimism. It is saying, my God, at some point in the near future, we are going to have characters who are super geniuses, each and every one of them. And each and every one of them has, you know, amazing powers, so to speak, you know, in terms of augmented by the technology. You know, if you want to fire a phaser, it's as simple as pointing your hand and firing your phaser. You know, it's and in fact, in real life, what would happen in those, if you were going to do it on screen, you'd have the ring aimed at whatever you want to fire, and then popping up over the arm would be the targeting, the sighting mechanism. So you just look down there and go, okay, got him, bam, you know, he's done. You know, if you run into Borg, hey, those guys seem to really respond well to actual physical projectiles. Picard is able to mow them down with a machine gun. No problem. It can make essentially physical projectiles. You know, so a large range of things. They'd be virtually invulnerable. You know, there are certain weapons that you could use on an individual human being that might get through the force field, but not very many. It is a lot like a Green Lantern ring. Wasn't really intending it necessarily to be like that. I am thinking about, okay, I know what's coming in IT. What's coming after that? And I don't think I'll live to see the deal with lots of power in these rings, but I think I will live to see nanocomputers, well, quantum computers, married with connecting to your brain, married with contact lenses that display your display. I think that's going to be coming up. I think that certainly my Padawans will live to see that. When your kids are calling you a grandpa, they'll be wearing those. Excuse me. So what time is it now? I've been on for about an hour, gibbering on mostly. So anybody wants to throw anything out, feel free. And I will gibber on with you if you like. Let me see if I can build a card here real quick. If this will blow me out or not. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can put something on the screen. And let me add an image. All right, because I was talking earlier about how the United States has multiple independent subcultures that are not based along things like racial lines or anything like that. Oh, God, I hope I can find this. Let's see, I think it's a JPEG. Called like Pro Wrestling Territories. And, Peter Pan Phaser Pictures Planet. I have so many different pictures that I can choose from. I'm not seeing it here naturally. It's probably PNG. Who the hell knows? Too many pictures. I have. Nope, it's not a PNG. That's a PDN. Sorry. PNG. Okay. TU. How about W? Wrestling Territories.png. And let me change the size of this so you can see me over it. And then I will drop this down so it's behind my webcam. Well, yeehaw. Okay, you just saw me build myself a card
Spoiler
here.
alert.
Oops. Sorry, I
Spoiler
hit my
alert.
spoiler alert card. Where's my
Prepare for incoming.
American subculture one? I was dragging it up to where it should be for my purposes. Okay, American subcultures. All right, I was mentioning here early on, the United States has a number of different subcultures, and they're not things like black, white, all of that. Those do not constitute a subculture. What constitutes a subculture generally is geographic area. You know, who colonized that originally in the U.S., what sorts of raw materials are there, so that's how people make their livings. You know, so as I mentioned, you know, in Virginia, you get coal mines. You know, in the upper Great Plains where I live, you get, you know, cattle ranching. You get a little east of here, you get more generalized farming. You know, Iowa, a lot more generalized farming because a lot more, they get a lot more precipitation, and so they can do that. So if we look here, if you look at the, let me move this up to where I can see it. The pinkish area in the center, assuming that my eyes haven't completely lost all all of my ability. I'm a bit colorblind, I'm told. My kids tell me that. But then the center of the country, I can't point to it. Center of the country, this pinkish area right here, that funky looking one with the sort of handle sticking out of the back, that is Nebraska, where I live. There is a city right at the border of Iowa and Nebraska, which is Omaha. That is a city of about 1 million people. Lincoln is a little bit south and east of there, mostly east, and that's about 340,000 people. And then there's another one in the middle of the state where Grand Island is, and I'm not sure how much it is anymore. But that's where I live, that state there. The pinkish area that you see surrounding that, Colorado, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, Minnesota for the most part, we are our own subculture because we make our living in a different way, generally agriculturally. When you get off into the East Coast, that is a whole other mess. You can see there's a lot more of them, and that's because they were settled by different people. Those original 13 colonies are in there. So they were settled by different people, and they have very different ways of earning their livings. So you can't, you know, if you're going to make a law at the federal level, and you've got all of these subcultures to deal with, there's no possible way that you can pass a law that's going to apply equally to someone who lives in my pink part of the world as opposed to someone who lives down in Georgia's orangish part of the world. And the reason that this map is a good map of subcultures, you know, you look at this and say, wait a minute, Bill, it says professional wrestling territories of Canada and the United States. Yeah, it is. But here's why it's an accurate representation. Back in the 50s, there were pro wrestling promotions. It's not like today, where basically WWE has done away with all of this because they have all of wrestling. But there used to be regional promotions before television got big, before there was cable or anything like that. And what the regional promoters did was they got together and they said, okay, here's the deal. We will carve up the United States into individual territories. And each of our guys, and we'll form something called the National Wrestling Alliance. And each of our members will then have a piece of this territory that they already had that we carved out and said, this is yours. If anybody else tries to come in here and promote aside you and try to, compete with you, we are required in all the other territories to find our best talent and send them down there to beat them, to entice people to go to you instead of your competitor and drive them out. They got in trouble for that later on. There were some laws that they may have broken, but the NWA worked that way. Now, I've, growing up in this pink part of the world, that's the territory of the American Wrestling Association. So when I was growing up, before cable television, those were the only wrestling things we ever saw. We didn't know that any of these others existed. As far as we were concerned, AWA was it. They had their own heavyweight champion. It doesn't quite work that way with the other NWA members, but AWA had their own heavyweight champion. But they had a huge territory, if you look at the size of this geographically. And they ultimately moved out into California as well, and some of these other states in the center. They were up in Canada and farther in places here. So they were a fairly large territory geographically. They were one of the biggest. But they had their own wrestlers. We would only ever see them on our TVs. We never saw anyone from the West Coast, never saw anybody from the East Coast, never saw anybody from the South, never saw anybody from Texas. Just that stuff in pink, wrestlers that worked there. When I got much older, pre what I like to call kayfabe era pro wrestling, is kind of one of my guilty pleasures. Back when they pretended the match outcomes were not prearranged, when they pretended everything was real. That pretending, that acting, by the way, that was called kayfabe. They would kayfabe for the rubes. We were the rubes. But I have an affinity to old, pre-kayfabe era, pro wrestling that was basically about 1985-ish or earlier. So with YouTube, I could start to see people who had recorded these things, on VHS or whatever, and they digitized them and uploaded them. And now you can see all kinds of different, pro wrestling territories that I never knew existed. That were, matches that were happening alongside mine. But because we never saw them, they never saw us. They never saw anybody but their own territories. And I found out that each territory has a different style. Up in the AWA, people up there are a little more pragmatic. They wanted to see wrestling that looked like wrestling. It didn't involve tons and tons of what they call heel versus babyface. They had that. But the heels were not overbearing. They were people that you could believe were in wrestling but were bad guys. You get down to Memphis, and that is a whole other world. Memphis had a lot of screaming and carrying on from the audience. The audience in AWA didn't do that. Between matches, they were quiet. But when the matches started, of course, then they were okay. But to get down to Memphis, audience is screaming constantly. Even in the studio audiences are constantly screaming. And their heels, that's the bad guys in wrestling parlance, the heels look like cartoon characters to people from the AWA. If a wrestler, and this happens, sometimes they'd move from one territory to another. If a wrestler from Memphis came up to AWA and tried to work the same way that they did in Memphis, they would have been booed off out of the arena. If a wrestler from the AWA went down to Memphis and tried to work the same way they did in Memphis, as they did in AWA, the Memphis audiences would have found them boring as hell. So each of these, and there's other places, Texas, for example, had a reputation, and having seen some now, I get it, had a reputation of being what's called stiff-armed. And that is where it is a little rougher, literally rougher, and there's more likelihood that a wrestler might actually suffer an injury. Stiff-armed means like if you're going to do a clothesline or something, right? If you're doing a clothesline, ordinarily it's not stiff-armed. You're not going to get hurt running into the clothesline, right? But in Texas, it was a little more stiff-armed. You could conceivably get hurt running into somebody's arm like that. So they all had their own little styles, all a little bit different. And that's because they were different cultures. These people, the individual local promoters, knew how to promote their wrestling to the culture that they were serving. And so that's why, in my opinion, this map is, in fact, a really good map of what, individual subcultures in the United States look like. And it shouldn't be any big surprise. When you look at it, you see a lot of different subcultures on the East Coast there. And that makes sense. You had a lot of, colonization there in the beginning, and then everything kind of just moved out, into the West from there, West. So it sort of makes sense that there's more of those subcultures in the East. But as I say, getting back to making laws at a national level, if you make a law that benefits the people in the purple here, that is going to say, okay, these people who are, largely making their money, not anymore, but I mean the vast majority of the land involves making money from agriculture, that is almost going to certainly hurt someone in New York City. Because the law that they make out here won't necessarily apply to their circumstances over here. It is a radically different subculture. And similarly, the other way around, if you make a law for New York City, I guarantee you, if you make a national law that will apply equally to everyone in New York City, it will harm people in my part of the country. And this is why a big centralized federal government is a bad idea. You want to have a government that's as close to you as possible so they can make laws that are individual to you. But yeah, I was able to get that up. I've never taken that down. I thought I had that up there. I have several cards up here that are, sort of for emergencies. Like if I have to go to the bathroom real quick or something, I have an emergency trailer card that I will put up. So you have heard my pitch for CBS. Please call them and tell them, go look at this guy's video. I'll put a time code when I'm done with this, so where that starts, so that, you can just call Point CBS. Go over on their Twitter and say, look, this guy's got a really good idea for a show. It's got an arc, it's got season arc, it's got individual episodes with individual stories that you can follow without having necessarily see the entire freaking series. So, go tell him. And he's got a plan. He's got a plan for 5 years. And that's it. It's a 5-year closed series. We are going to have 5, and that's all. Could you go on later? Yes. But you'd want to make it something different. You wouldn't want to make it about, this colonization and trying to make peace with a race that is very aggressive and just desperate to hang on to what they have. So, excuse me. Yeah, half a second. I'm going to do something real quick. Sorry, that corner of my green screen has been bothering me since I saw it. That corner had been showing out from the tip of the green screen and had been bugging me, so I had to fix that. Well, I have one other thing that I can talk about here. It has nothing to do with science fiction or Star Trek necessarily. This is me having more, again, some political commentary, which I do from time to time, and this is bothering me a lot. There was a Twitter user, Red Nation Rising Georgia. I have linked to the user in my description box. He wrote something that I think was really, really well said. Doesn't matter, I don't think, to me, it doesn't matter if you're a conservative or a liberal, or in my case, a libertarian. I think that what he said was important. And so I'm just going to read what he said here as he wrote it. Or she, I don't know the gender of this person. We are seeing the most draconian measures enforced at all levels of government than we've ever seen in our lifetimes. And yet, rather than being alarmed by the things that are going on around us, so many of you applaud. People being arrested for spending too much time outside, and you applaud. Pastors are being arrested for daring to hold church services, and you applaud. A church is shut down by police scattering nails at the entrances, and you applaud. A child's birthday party is raided by police, and you applaud. A young woman is ticketed for going on a leisurely drive alone because it's deemed not essential travel, and you applaud. A parade of school teachers and administrators who wanted to drive through neighborhoods to wave at children was busted up by cops because they were non-essential, and you applauded. A lone paddleboarder in the ocean on a beach without anyone else around is arrested because he's violating quarantine orders, and you applaud. People are being denied life-saving medical treatments because they are not a priority, that is, not essential as deemed by government, as the entire medical system is focused on one thing, and you applaud. Businesses are being forcibly closed and padlocked, and owners are arrested for refusing to shut down, and you applaud. Dairy farmers and soon other farmers are being incentivized to stop dairy farming and sell their herds, and you don't seem to understand the implications of this. Let me explain it, as someone who lives in an area that's mostly agricultural. You'll starve. You're being told to use hotlines and online forms provided by your local governments to report your neighbors who don't obey, and you comply. You scold people day after day for not obeying government edicts, and if any of us complain about or question about what's happening, you lecture about how we're dangerous to society and that we don't care if people are dying. You've somehow managed to convince yourselves that people whose lives are affected by a virus are much more important than people whose lives are being destroyed and in many cases leading to death by the effects of a worldwide economic shutdown and impending worldwide depression, the likes of which no one living has ever seen. At what point will you start to question what's going on? How far does government have to push you before you wake up from your slumber? How far are you willing to go with this? I mean, if they told you to load your families onto train cars so that you would get taken to virus protection facilities for your own safety, would you do it? Yes. Yes, you would. That has become painfully obvious to me. And the whole time, you'd be shaking your finger and yelling at those of us who refused, accusing us of being a danger to society and not caring if people die. But they won't have to load you. They won't have to load you onto cars and take you to a virus protection facility for you to comply, because you're doing that voluntarily. They control your mind. They control you through fear. They control you by convincing that the world is a scary and dangerous place, but they're here to help you. Just care for you and keep you safe as long as you obey. They know that as long as you're locked inside your comfortable home with Netflix, Hulu, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a cell phone, and dangling a $1,200 check in front of you like a carrot on a stick, you'll comply. No force is necessary for those in the herd. You are being imprisoned willingly, and you are too blind to see it. And that's what that user on Twitter had to say. I have to say I totally agree with him. If I didn't, I wouldn't have said it just now. As I said early on, when it comes to, I can't talk about that virus because if they do, YouTube looks for people talking about it and does certain things if you don't say certain things about it. So we'll say the house party. When I took at the house party, people who are in badly affected areas like New York, what you have to remember is that you're not the whole world. You are a very tiny geographic area. Again, if you look at my subcultures map, where's New York? About there. It's where WWWF is on this thing. Damn it, I can't get my finger in the right place. There-ish. You know what I'm talking about. You are an incredibly small area geographically. I know you have a lot of people, but in terms of geographics, you are tiny. You are not the entire world. Admittedly, your world is kind of big in terms of people, but if you look at the rest of the entire country, you are a tiny, tiny place. In fact, you could take all of the major metro areas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, New York, Boston, etc., and you could fit them all inside of Nebraska, easily. It's a small geographic area. So when you're sitting there and you're thinking about yourselves and what's necessary to keep yourself safe, which it certainly is in New York City, you have a horrifyingly dense population, denser population than anywhere else in the U.S., I would dare say. So when you guys get it, you get it bad. But just keep in mind, not everybody's like that. And so what you need to have happen isn't what everyone else has to happen. So, for example, where I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, again, a pink one right there. Lincoln, Nebraska, Nebraska itself has a population of over 2 million people. I'm not sure exactly. Most of them are centered in Omaha, which is a city of about 1 million people. The next largest city is where I live in Lincoln. It's about 340,000 for the metro area. Grand Island is smaller than that. I don't know what it's at. I think about 100,000, but that's kind of a guess right now. I haven't looked lately. But in all of Nebraska, looking right now at the house party statistics right now, we have 814 positives. That's all. 814 out of 2 million. And only 17 deaths. And the largest concentration of them is in Omaha, where there are 242. Oddly enough, the second largest concentration is actually Grand Island, the third largest city. I'm not sure how that's happening. The third largest is in my city, which has 54, and no deaths that I'm aware of, just 54 cases. And I dare say that for the most part, I would be surprised to find if it wasn't generally immunocompromised people, elderly people, people who had some serious problem before that. I think the average person who doesn't, who just gets the flu seasonally anyway, they're not going to notice much of a difference except flu symptoms. And they may not even ever be tested. Could they pass it on to people? Yes. But, the people who are really at risk are the immunocompromised, like the elderly and people who have other issues. So we don't have any of those shelter-in-place orders here. We don't have any of that. All they've done in Lincoln is facilitated the coming gigantic, horrifying depression, economic depression, by causing all these businesses to shut down or to operate in a very different way. By doing that, they have last week, I think it was last week, they reported 7 million new unemployment compensation benefits requests were filed. 7 million. That erases just about all of the jobs that had been done under President Trump. Just about erases it in one fell swoop. We are going to go back to at least 2008's economy and quite possibly far worse. Because we are having the entire world shutting down. What I kind of have to ask myself at some point is that really worth it? I mean, given, here in Nebraska, right, we don't have any shelter in place. We can go and come and go as we please. We see some stuff going up. The stores that are still open have tape out by the cash registers 6 feet apart, stay 6 feet, etc. Problem is, I knew too much about science. That's a facepalm. Because in a store, the air is recirculated inside of it. All of the people who ever wander in that store, all of their germs are getting circulated and recirculated in the air. There is nothing whatsoever that is filtering out all of that stuff. You go to grocery store, we have the big ones, big grocery store / department stores almost, some of them, that are still open. They're still selling everything. They still get thousands of, customers a day. Well, that means thousands of customers a day are going to share all of these viruses. And a lot of them are wearing face masks. People who go in there wearing face masks now. You have to have a certain kind of face mask. A face mask rated for dust will do nothing for a virus. Virus is so tiny that a dust-rated face mask is like trying to catch water with a sieve. It'll slip right between. You have to have a specific type of face mask before it'll do any kind of good. And they're very expensive and they're hard to find anymore because everybody's bought them and the people in healthcare have them and stuff like that. You got to get a good one, not just one that's rated for dust. If you can buy it cheap, probably it doesn't do a damn thing for you. There's that stuff going on. And when you look at it from that perspective, from my perspective, what I really see is what I call an infection vector. Starseeds Player says the dust-rated face mask will only protect against droplets coughed onto you. Yeah, and if you're sick, nobody that I know around here that's sick is actually going outside. They're all going, oh hell, I might have the house party. I might have that. I better not go out. I don't go out seeing people coughing and sneezing. That isn't happening right now. I think people are smart enough to realize, okay, well, I probably don't have it, but I might. I don't want to go out there and infect people. I'll have to figure out some other way to get my groceries and, to deliver. So, but, the dust-rated mask, as you say, will only protect against droplets coughed onto you. It will not protect if you have a virus, for example, and you're just breathing in and out. Won't stop it. Like water trying to catch water in a sieve. Just won't work. So I look at things, as I mentioned toward the beginning of this, I look at things in terms of an infection vector. And with an infection vector, if we look at my state, which is a really small one, we have no international airport anywhere in the state. Not even Omaha has an international airport. To get to an international airport, you need to go nearest one's in Chicago, which is a good 8 hours drive from Epley Airfield in Omaha. And you could, of course, do connecting. But I think at this point, practically nobody is going in and out of the country because they're too afraid. So you have to have an international airport so that you can have inbound travel to and from other places in the world. You need to be close to or sitting on a border of another country. So, for example, Nebraska is 2,000 miles to the east coast, 2,000 miles to the west coast, 1,500 or so miles down to Mexico, and two whole states that I don't know how wide they are. They're probably half the length of California between us and Canada. So we don't get much in terms of international travelers. We do have like illegal aliens, but those are hard to count. We don't know what they are exactly. We do have some. We don't have much travel even from the coasts. It used to be 3 or 4 generations ago, someone could claim to have an ancestor who lived back east. My grandmother lives back east. We're generations away from that now. We don't have that. And people on the coasts, well, they don't want to visit us because they have a completely inaccurate perception of what people in my part of the country are like and think that we're stupid hicks. So they don't really have any impetus to want to come visit us. It's not something they do. The best you can say is in the state north of us, South Dakota, people do go to the Black Hills to see Mount Rushmore and stuff like that. But that's them, not us. Nobody's coming through here. If you're coming through Nebraska, it's just to get through Nebraska. The second most boring drive in existence is Lincoln, Nebraska to the western edge of the state. Oh my God. It is boring. Because there aren't that many centers of population. You get Omaha of 1 million right on the border, Lincoln of 340,000, an hour west of there, half hour west of there, and then it's nothing. Just nothing. It's fields, people doing things for cattle ranching. It's all agricultural. It's just nothing for hour after hour after hour. The best part of it is Nebraska's interstate highway speed limit is 75, and you can pretty much make that all the way through. One time when my ex and I were traveling from Chicago out to Yellowstone National Park, which is in the northwest corner of Wyoming, which is another bordering state, but it's ways off. Ordinarily, that would probably be a 2-day drive. I'm a bit of a lead footer. I was in my youth. We made that in about 9 hours. I don't know how fast we were going. It was approaching 90 miles an hour in many places. But that's because I cannot stand that drive. Here to the border of Nebraska, western border of Nebraska, is really boring. And then you get to the western border and you say, oh, I know how they decided where to put the border from Nebraska. They said the moment that the scenery gets even remotely interesting, we'll call that Wyoming. It is really boring. The worst one is, I think it's I-70 through Kansas. That's really incredibly boring. I-80 through Nebraska is second, with I-90 in South Dakota being the third. Best thing about 90 in South Dakota is the speed limit there is 80 miles an hour. And I've done it. I've occasionally done in excess of 80 miles an hour because, again, the drive across there is a lot of, grassland for ranching and stuff like that. And it's a natural prairie. So driving through that can be really boring. It's a little better because, you always have a lot of these people who are coming for two things. Either just in general in the summertime, there's a very brisk tourist trade that comes through there to go to like Mount Rushmore and the Black Hills, which have a lot of stuff like that. By the way, if you're ever out there in the Black Hills, do catch Mount Rushmore. It's nice. But also check out the Crazy Horse National Monument. That is very, very cool. It is roughly, when it's completed, it's going to be roughly like 8 times the size of Mount Rushmore. And Mount Rushmore, by the way, was never completed. But it's going to be like 8 times the size of Mount Rushmore. It's gigantic. You can't even get a good feel for how big it is from the visitor center that they've got going on. It's amazing. It's huge. So, do take a look at that when you're out there. But we have that, and then there's also South Dakota has the Sturgis, South Dakota motorcycle rally, where you get 100,000 bikers crossing, across the entire state from every direction to land in Sturgis, which is a little tiny town. If you're ever through there and it's not Motorcycle Rally Week, there's nothing there. Motorcycle Rally Week, it becomes really amazing. I have an uncle who lives in a nearby town, and he goes through a broker every year and rents out his house for that week. And with the money he makes, he spends that week in Disney World with his kid. That's how much you can make just by 1 week. You can afford to get on a plane, go to Disney World, stay in one of the resorts, and then come back. My aunt has often said, that one who was by there, I remember overhearing her say once to some other family member at a family reunion, "Oh, well, if you like tits, Sturgis Rally is the place to be." I gather it's rather like in some ways like Mardi Gras. Ask, sure, they'll lift up their shirt for you, and you can take pictures. You can find them all over the internet if you look. But those two things are big draws in the summertime, and so there are a lot of smaller, kind of crappier tourist trap things that have sprung up along I-80 to take advantage of the fact that you are probably sick of driving through this. Stop and see the 1880 town, which is not that great. Stop and see the guy who has made cars into look like dinosaurs. Stuff like that. Just silly stuff. But they do get some of that. Here in Nebraska, no. No, if you're here, you're either going to visit somebody or you're driving through, and you want to get through as fast as you freaking can because it's boring. Boring as hell past the city I live in. Sorry, guys in western Nebraska, but it's true. I-80 is a horrifyingly boring thing to drive west of Lincoln. It's terrible. So anyway, we don't have a large infection vector. We just don't. There aren't that many people traveling in and out, and those who are don't stay. If you go to New York City, whole other thing. Multiple international airports. The entire eastern seaboard is filled with to overflowing with all kinds of shipping and docking and ports all throughout the area. Nobody who comes in from the international side, whether it's via the air, the sea, or the land, none of them are tested for anything upon entry into the United States. And then you add to that the fantastic population density, like nowhere else in the United States. I'm not aware of anywhere in the U.S. that has a population density of, say, Manhattan Island. And having been there, I know it's, Omaha, nothing like that population density. Not even Los Angeles. I've been out there. I did not get the impression that Los Angeles has that kind of population density. You can take Manhattan Island, stick it into Lincoln, and it'd still be smaller than the geographic area of Lincoln by far. So, really densely packed. And so if you guys, are going to get something, it's going to spread really fast. So I look at infection vectors. Ours is very, very small. Hence, we have very few cases and only so far 17 deaths to this at this moment. Like, reload the page and see exactly what it is right this nanosecond, or as recently updated. 814 cases out of 10,991 tested, with only 17 deaths statewide. And in my city here, we have 54 cases and no deaths that I'm aware of. It doesn't break out the deaths by county, unfortunately. But I don't think we've had any deaths there. Those have been in Omaha and Grand Island. So, as I said toward the top, if you guys, if you really want to solve this problem going forward, you don't let government do crazy crap to you. You don't let government become more of a police and surveillance state, which it's been becoming since 9/11. If I'm a grandpa and anybody wasn't around before 9/11, well, I have to tell you, it used to be a lot more free. And what they have done since 9/11 has not made you more secure in the slightest. All that stuff at the security airport theater, the airport theater security theater rather. I used to be a courier from Toronto to Chicago, and I can tell you that if I wanted to get a bomb on a plane still today, I could. I know how that stuff works. I could get one on if I wanted to. The fact that no one has means that no one is trying. And all of that stuff that they're doing on airports is airport security theater. Starseeds Player says the government made a massive power grab after 9/11. Yes, they did, and they were successful. They were very successful, particularly in terms of IT, something that I am disgusted that my colleagues did not say no to. I got to tell you something, guys in IT. I want you to listen to me because this is true. This is absolutely true, and you need to take it to heart. My 40 years in IT, I watched something happen that you maybe don't know, but is true. We in IT actually rule the world. We rule the world. There is not a single thing that gets done anywhere in any business that does not hinge on what we do. If we decide that it is time to assert our authority, if we say, no, I'm not going to do this. No, I'm going to tear this down. No, I'm not going to do it. Okay, you can fire me, but the next guy is not going to do it. They're not going to create this horrible thing. They're not going to tear down the one that's there. If we did that, we would stop it. We could if we wanted to. We could, in fact, if we tried hard enough, bring the world completely to its knees. Because, in fact, we rule the world. If we ever get it through our heads, we can shut this crap down. Overnight, we can shut it down. I don't think they're going to get it in their heads. IT people are like me, actually kind of introverted. We don't mind staying by ourselves like this. Hell, my best days are when I got to telecommute when I was in the industry. But we rule the world, not the politicians. They don't rule the world. They tell us what to do, but if we decide we're not going to do it, guess what, guys? We rule the world. So I am disgusted by what my colleagues did build in the wake of 9/11. They built the surveillance state that we all now suffer from for no reason whatsoever. They built things like the NSA's data center in Idaho, in which is so large in terms of storage capacity that my colleagues have estimated that there is enough storage there based on the power that it's sucking up. There's enough storage in that facility to store every last man, woman, and child in the United States, every phone call, every transaction made on the internet, everywhere. And I know they're doing it because when I was in the industry, we at various data centers, Facebook is a good example. Google has them. I saw the one in Facebook. I saw the one in One IT. You have what are called NSA cages. Now, these are caged off areas inside of a data center that have NSA equipment. And essentially anything that comes in or out of that data center also routes through those things. And those things send it back to the Utah data center for the NSA keeps. And they're collecting everything. Now, they don't look at it as a rule. What they do is called ad hoc reporting. And that's where they say, okay, we collect all this data, and we do what's called data mining, and we say, okay, I want to know everything there is to know about Bill Stone. And it pulls out, goes through all the stuff that it has, pulls out, drops a report on me. So that's sitting and watching it. Somebody's sitting there watching what you're doing. What they're doing is collecting all the data so that if they want to know everything about you, they can. That was immoral. My colleagues should have said no. That was immoral in the extreme. Let's see, it looks like you've got some kind of smile emoticon that I can't read because I'm not wearing my glasses. I can read the text, but I can't read the glasses. Yeah. It's bad, and my colleagues have been party to it. I've never been party to it, but my colleagues have been, and that was wrong. Guys, we rule the world. We want to stop this at any time we can. Any time that we finally get it through our brains that we can do it, we can stop it overnight. Just that simple. And we're seeing worse of it now. As I mentioned in the thing that I read from that guy on Twitter, we're seeing way worse of it now. People are so terrified of this. And I understand being afraid. I have immediate family members who are immunocompromised. You know, if they were exposed to the virus, it could conceivably be a problem. But that's true of any flu-like illness for them. If they're exposed to any flu-like illness, they would have a problem. It's not just the house party virus. It's also any kind of virus whatsoever, any flu-like virus, and they would conceivably have a serious problem because it, unlike a person with a normal immune system, it just kind of goes through your system. You cough, you hack, you have runny nose, bloodshot eyes for a few days, and then you're done. And the same thing is true for most people with this house party. And any kind of viral thing like the flu will have the same effect. You'll get runny nose, blah, 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 etc. And then if somebody's got an immunocompromisation, then the thing can turn into like pneumonia, and that can kill you, you know. So I understand being worried on that level, but at the same time, what we've done is self-imposed a economic crash that is going to maybe be worse than the stock market crash of 1929. It happened faster and is throwing more people into unemployment. I would not be shocked to see official unemployment numbers ranging in the 25% range, which exceeds the Great Depression by a couple of percentage points. Wouldn't be shocked at all. Hey, Starred Seeds Player, thank you very much. Feel free to watch the remainder of it on demand. Although, to be honest, I'm probably not going to go on much more after this. I've said most of what I was going to say. And not everybody in the universe is asking for more, so never outweigh your welcome. Leave while people are smiling. So that's, to me, it's something where New York City probably has to worry about it a lot more than everybody else. But we shouldn't be shutting down the country's economic engine to do it. You shouldn't, like here in Lincoln, we really shouldn't be shutting down all the businesses that we have. We shouldn't be shutting out 30,000 people from the University of Nebraska, which is what it is. University of Nebraska at Lincoln, the Cornhuskers, is 30,000 students. And they're all now working remotely. And I got to say, that's stupid. I was an instructor at the college level in IT for 3 years. I know for a fact that the number of students who have the dedication that it takes to do online work is small. And even smaller is the number of instructors and professors who have the technical wherewithal to create an online curriculum that actually works. The number is tiny. So you're essentially saying, okay, we're either going to say, screw it, we're just going to give them their degrees regardless, because even though they don't know what the hell they're supposed to have learned. Or you're going to say, if you were honest, you'd say, okay, well, I'm afraid you guys are going to have to, we'll refund you for this semester because you blew most of it, but you're going to have to do an additional semester to catch up. If you were going to do it right, that's what you do. Same thing with the Lincoln Public Schools. Closing them is almost worse than keeping them open. Because, most families, a lot of them, of course, are now laid off or fired. But if you're going to keep your businesses open, most families, when they have two-income families, they can't live without having two incomes. And so what do you do when the kid can't go to school? Well, you say, okay, Grandma, would you look at the kid? Well, who's more immunocompromised, the kid or the grandma? What you should say is anybody who's beyond a certain age, maybe a middle immunocompromised, working at the Lincoln Public Schools should go home and get paid vacation, indefinitely until this is all gone. But the kids, most of them would be fine, And again, closing the businesses here doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. I think you could say, if you're above a certain age and you work there, don't come to work. If you have health problems, pre-existing health problems, don't come to work. Or if you're a business owner, well, maybe you say, okay, well, it's time to close the business because you have a problem. But it doesn't make sense to me to completely destroy the world economy over this. It just doesn't make sense. There are more people that are going to be harmed by that than would be in the virus. And that does include death in some cases. Maybe more cases than the virus. We get to a point where agriculture is falling apart. My part of the country feeds not just the United States, but the entire world. There are over 2 billion people that my part of the country feed. You could be looking at worldwide famine over this, and much of it in the United States. I mean, if we're shutting this stuff down, how is the meat that's being raised and made in my part of the country going to hit the grocery store shelves in New York City? They only have 3 days worth of groceries on a good day. What happens if they're not getting it every day to replenish? You're going to see people in New York City starting to have problems getting food. Just a dumb idea to destroy the world economy over this. I don't think it's a good idea. But as I say, gotta leave while the audience is smiling. Always leave on an up note, hopefully. So that is all that I have to say about that. I would love to keep this conversation going, so please leave your comments, questions, and nasty remarks, and I'll do my best to respond to you. So thanks for watching. That is all the time that we have today for this episode of Tales from SYL Ranch, where everyone is entitled to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.